Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everyone. We'll get underway. Everyone's dragging a bit this morning after last night's game. I know I am. Go Charge. Welcome to meeting number 47 of the Planning and Housing Committee. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I'll ask the committee coordinator for a roll call, please.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Curry. Here. Councillor Dudas.
Here.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
Chair of Quorum.
Thank you very much, Kelly. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.1 to 4.3 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those specifically identified in the Planning Act who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on May 28th, 2025, please email or call the committee or councillor coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Are the minutes of our meeting 46, May 7th, 2025 confirmed?
Confirmed.
Thank you. A couple of items I think will be fairly quick to deal with. 4.1, the zoning bylaw amendment for 4401 Fallowfield Road. Hadn't anticipated the presentation. There are no delegations and no correspondence. Did anyone want this item held? Evan from Poten, if the committee is prepared to carry this, did you still wish to speak? Is this item carried? Thank you. The item 4.2 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 535 Leggett Drive. We don't have any delegations. We'd received no correspondence. Did anyone wish to have this item held or make a quick comment? Oh, there's a surprise. Councillor Curry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how amazing this application is. I'm sure everybody was thrilled to see it. It's office to residential conversion right in the tech park. Right? It is awesome. Yeah, I'm glad everybody's seeing how awesome it is. Leading the way. Yes, there is. I have a new song I'll be singing shortly. Wait for it. That's for another day. But yeah, so the live, work, play, learn, and innovate model for the park. This is the first live, right? So people actually live right in the park. It's very, very exciting. And it will change the dynamic as we were talking about earlier, like people living there and bringing more life to it all like 24 hours a day. So it's a fabulous application. And I will say it's KRP Properties, Terry Matthews leading the way once again. So thank you everyone for your support.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Jeffrey Kelly with Novatech. I don't think you're actually registered to speak. If the committee is prepared to carry this, so I'll give you an opportunity to say a few words. No, and not online. So, colleagues, is this item carried? Thank you. Which will bring us to item 4.3, which is the zoning bylaw amendment for Deschâtelet. We have a presentation and we have delegations. We'll hold that one. And then once that's over, we'll get through a couple of administrative items and I'll turn the chair over to Councillor Gower for the Student Housing Caucus report. So item 4.3, we'll get a presentation on that from staff. Gentlemen, we're in your hands whenever you're ready.
Good morning, members and committee of the committee and public. My name is Jack Smith, a planner and development review central, and I'm here today to walk through the proposed zoning bylaw amendment at 295 and 355 Deschâtelet Avenue. Next slide, please. The sites are located within the Greystone Village Plan of Subdivision within the Old Ottawa East community. The lands are currently vacant and separated by the tree-lined Grand Allée and the future forecourt park. Next slide, please. The minor zoning bylaw amendment seeks to facilitate the creation of a planned unit development consisting of 18 semi-detached and 12 townhouse dwellings for a total of 30 dwelling units which have active at-grade entrances along Deschâtelet Avenue, Desoblatz Avenue, and the future forecourt park. Vehicular access is provided to each dwelling unit from private car courts located internally to the site, and the parent R3Q zone is being retained and permits planned unit developments. Next slide, please. This slide includes renders of the proposed development depicting the proposed buildings and landscaping surrounding the site and enhancing the interface of the proposed development with the public realm. The proposal includes the retention of the 2 existing mature trees within the Grand Allée, and additional tree plantings, such as those shown on the render on the left side of the screen, will continue to be reviewed through the corresponding and ongoing site plan control process. Next slide. The application seeks to amend the existing site-specific R3Q zoning through the addition of new provisions and removal or amending of existing provisions. Of note, the applicant is seeking to permit front, rear, and corner side yard setbacks of 2 meters, in addition to revised standards for permitted projections relating to balconies and stairs within these required yards. With respect to the development interface and required setbacks from the Grand Allée, 355 Deschâtelet, which is the southern parcel, also known as Block 28, has a zoning compliant interior side yard setback from the Grand Allée of 2 meters, whereas 1.8 meters is required. And 295 Deschâtelet, which is the northern parcel, Block 29, requires relief as the definitions of the zoning identify the property line abutting the Grand Allée as the rear property line. As such, 7.5 meter setback is required. Further relief is outlined on the next slide. Next slide, please. Relief is also required. Can we go back one slide? Thank you. Relief is also required from the planned unit development provisions and include revisions to private way width and private way setback requirements and landscaping requirements. The relief also includes that the lands not be subject to Section 144, being alternative setbacks affecting low-rise residential development in the R1 through R4 zones within the Greenbelt, the creation of site-specific waste collection provisions, and additional language that planned unit developments are one lot for zoning purposes. Next slide, please. The developer is requesting that the reduced rear yard setback on Block 29 adjacent to the alley in order to provide for consistent zoning requirements amongst the 2 lots and to create a symmetrical pattern of development, which activates the Grand Alley by providing for shallow lot depth and active entrances to the public realm, which is consistent with the urban pattern of built form anticipated within the inner urban transect and neighborhood designation policies. As previously noted, new trees along the Grand Alley are being considered through the ongoing site plan control application, such as those shown on the rendering before us, which would improve the existing tree line. Next slide, please. With respect to the heritage views, the existing tree line along the Grand Alley form the heritage assets which ultimately frame and establish views along the Grand Alley from Main Street, for which the terminus of the view is the center block of the Deschâtelet building. This slide is showing images of the existing conditions and views down the alley to the center block of the Deschâtelet building. Site visits have been conducted during winter and spring conditions to assess the views during different times of the year, with varying levels of foliage on the trees. Planning staff and heritage staff have reviewed the proposed development and are of the professional opinion that a satisfactory level of separation is being provided and that no impediment of the views established by the existing tree line are occurring as a result of the proposed development. The proposed development does not impede or encroach within the established tree line. Critical root zones are being maintained, and forestry staff have found that the proposed setbacks are adequate to preserve the existing trees within the alley. Next slide, please. Staff recommend approval of the minor zoning bylaw amendment as the proposed development demonstrates consistency with the inner urban transect and neighborhood designation policies contained within the official plan and the policies within the Old Ottawa East secondary plan as assessed in staff's recommendation report. Next slide, please. And that wraps up my presentation to the committee. Thank you, and let us know if there are any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Could I just ask the process as to why we're here is a little bit different than usual, and just for the sake of the public who may be tuned in, How is this different from a normal application?
As of January 1st of this year, staff do have delegated authority over minor zoning bylaw amendments. That being said, given some concerns over the development's interface with the Grand Allée noted by the councillor in Old Ottawa East Community Association, as we were proceeding with the recommendation, we did let the councillor know the proposed recommendation, and it was noted that delegated authority would be lifted in this instance.
Thank you very much. I think it's interesting because we're just starting to see the first wave of these new minor zoning amendments that are delegated to staff for approval, and this is the first one where the local councillor has lifted that delegated approval. So we're here today. There are two delegations, John Dance and Paul Goodkey, and Evan and Greg are here from the applicant team as well. So I think what I'll do is I'll ask John, then Paul to give us their presentation, and then Evan Garfinkel and Greg Winters can speak for the developer wrap up. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here. I very much appreciate the opportunity, Councillor Menard. I want to give a bit of background. Next slide, please. Or can I advance that? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Background to this project. Regional and the community and the city have over the last decade collaborated, and frankly, what you see with Greystone Village is a remarkable success. I particularly want to thank David and Josh Kardish of Regional Group, who have been so good throughout this very lengthy and very good process. The total Greystone Village targets will exceed our units built with the approval of the ones today, will be 35% beyond the original target that was set in the secondary plan and the initial proposal. This forecourt towns before you today is the smallest and last piece of the Greystone Village plan. What you heard and what is the case is Regional seeks a number, and I count 20 thereabouts, minor zoning amendments. I'm part of the board of the Community Association with the planning committee as well. We're seeking but one, well, maybe two, two minor revisions. That's all we're seeking if it pertain to the 6 units along Grand Allée. And we're specifically asking for the six of the 8 units along the Grand Allée to be set back a further 2 meters from what their plan is, so that they would be in line with the 2 most easterly units on the Grand Allée, which, to Regional's credit, they have already set back to accommodate the critical tree zone of the 2 mature trees there. Our point here is that we want to have, in the future, maybe 50 years, but we want to be able to have the large mature maples all along the Grand Allée, like the 2 that are there and like the many that are to the west. That's why we want this extra 2 meters in each side for a total of 6 units. It's not a lot of requests compared to what Regional is seeking in the way of minor zoning amendments. If I can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I set out that this critical root zone for in front of these 6 units. That's what we're really seeking for the future, for this. I don't know how many of you have visited Old Ottawa East recently, but this development is wonderful. And the Grand Allée with the forecourt park that will be in front of it and just in front of the Deschâtelet building with the community center and the new French school. That's the centerpiece of it. We're trying to make it as good as it possibly can be. We also think, contrary to what you heard about the heritage, we think that a wider view, in line with what Regional already did with their 2 excellent apartment buildings along it, it would be much better, maybe not for the view from the center of the Grand Allée at Main Street, but from the sides and as you walk towards it to make it this truly remarkable space. Yeah, it's good, but we can make it better for the sake of 2 meters on each side. The Heritage Review Panel, when they initially reviewed it, it did speak. If we go to the next slide, please. When they initially looked at it, they said the power and structure of the Grand Allée, which includes elements of the lawn, the forecourt park, will be an important part of the success of the scheme. And they're quite right. And they went on to say the trees are an important character-defining element of the Grand Allée, and the proponent will need to continue to study the impact the development will have on existing trees. The panel may indicate that additional space may be needed to ensure the health of the trees. But it's not just the health of the trees that are there, it's the trees that will be there for the next 100 years. This council, I would urge the committee chair that they look for the long term on this, not just, well, I won't. The regional's response to this, if I may get to the next slide, please, is that they can't accommodate our request. There's one request because the site is too constrained. It will result in the loss of units, making the project unfeasible. That's their wording. If we go to the next slide, please, we have to ask, can't 2 meters be found from the car courts? You know, we know this originally there were 42 units planned for his. And with the new form, and you know, we can't argue with form, but with this new form, we're now providing space, car court space, that's really would previously have been for 12 units. In other words, there was a reduction number of units that we're all so concerned with to accommodate car courts. Indeed, some of these car courts are there for 2-car garage in the center of the city. Ah, dear.
John, you're out of time.
Oh.
Are you able to wrap that up quickly?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. So there is room though to do it. And finally, my last slide, please. The towns are going to preserve great value from bordering on the 2 city parks, Grand Allée and Forecourt. The car courts consume land that was originally for 12 dwelling units. The requested minor setbacks will provide the critical root zones for large maples in the future. Let's finish Greystone Village as well if we can. Finally, in the event that you approve this, and we have a certain reality, we would really encourage regional to plant maples comparable to the ones that are already there that have the potential to grow as big, not smaller ones, but ones that have the potential to grow to be full size, so that for the next 100 years, we really have this glorious LA. Thank you very much, Chair. I do appreciate the opportunity once again.
Thank you very much, John. Does anyone have any questions for the delegation? Councilor Menard?
Thanks very much, Chair. And yeah, the reason I pulled that authority was because community had some questions. They wanted to air those out at committee, and that's the process. So I would rather not be here and that this would just get solved, because it's a pretty minor issue to hopefully get solved between the community and the developer. It wasn't getting solved, and this was the process. So in terms of questions to you, John, the maybe just explain to folks who haven't been to the area, because it is a fairly new area with it's an old area, but new construction here. There's a Main Street farmers market that exists here. How many thousands of residents would you say go along that Grand Allée over the course of a summer, and that with that view of that historic Des Châtelet building?
Councillor, through the chair. Well, there are every weekend there are hundreds and hundreds. The commercial reach to the credit of regional, the commercial along the Grand Allée, that's greatly increased as well with Tartelette and so on. But I mean, it is the center part, and I think it has to be appreciated. The new community center is going to be located in the Des Châtelet building. It will be the main way of our experiencing that community. It's the heart of Old Ottawa East. And as I said, the plan at present is good, but we have the opportunity to make it better.
Along the alley, everything is set back with clear views, except for those last few units. I guess, and even of those 4 units on each side, 2 of them are set back. What do you make of the discussion around, well, trees can block the views too?
Yes, trees can block the views if you're standing at the Main Street end of it. But as you walk along the Grande Allée, it should be opening up as you get to Forecourt Park, not closing down. So, and indeed, as you walk along the sidewalk by the Tartelette and get towards Forecourt Park and the Forecourt towns, you should be able to see more, not less, I would argue. I mean, you say, well, 2 meters isn't much, but conversely to regional, 2 meters isn't much. 2 meters would allow the critical root zone, which, as I said, and gave them credit for, they are keeping for the 2 most easterly units on the Grande Allée. Good for them, but let's do it all the way, I'd say.
And I guess the principal reason this is occurring is the turning radius for parking for 6 units.
Regional has been adamant that their engineers tell them that there's no way they could do it. I mean, this is with a number of the units having 2-car garages and so on. I'm not an engineer. I don't know. I do know, though, that the courtyards that are adjacent to the ones that we're suggesting could be shrunk slightly do accommodate the car. So it's a little beyond me as a non-professional, with respect, how it is that you need 16 meters for the car court we're talking about at the open mouth versus 11 for the interior, for the next over car court. Can't they budget? Can't they move it a little bit to give us these 2 meters? It's strange to me.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you for the presentation today. We'll move on to Paul Goodkey, who I understand is online.
Yes, hello. Can you see me?
We can see you and hear you, Paul. Whenever you're ready, you've got 5 minutes to address the committee.
I sent some images to Kelly. Here they are. So this is the Grande Allée. This is recent from Main Street. You can see some new trees have been planted along the left-hand side. They got quite a way to go in order to get up to canopy-sized tree. But they've got space. I think they will be able to make it. Next slide, please. So this is Main Street pre-construction, mature trees all the way along. Next slide, please. So this is the Grande Allée getting closer to the forecourt. Trees spaced every 10 meters or so. Next slide, please. This is the Grande Allée, past what's constructed now. So this is a recent photo. Got one large tree on the left, one large tree on the right. Those are the ones that are to be maintained, and the buildings have been set back to accommodate the critical root zone for these 2 mature trees. Next slide, please. So this is, we met with regional back in November 7th, 2003, and this is what they presented to us. Looked good, you know, got 4 trees, not sure about how far they're set back from the buildings. But the only question we really had was, where are these buildings in relation to the existing buildings closer to Main Street, the Valentine and Milu? Key thing here is 4 trees. Next slide, please. So this is pretty hard to see, I'm sorry, but we met with the regional June the 4th, and this is a site plan they gave us showing the 1 tree on the south side. Part of those first rows, the first building was set back. Can you read this? The A3 building has been set back to accommodate the existing trees, critical root zone. Next slide, please. This is an illustration from the Toronto guidelines for townhouse buildings. You can see that it's a guideline, but it's suggesting 7.5 meter setback from parks, natural areas, and other open space areas. This is what I think should be happening. Next slide, please. So this is the heritage statement. It's dated, it's revised, I think it's dated August. its comment says the footprint of the two A3 units at the eastern limit of the LA have been reduced to accommodate the tree canopy to ensure development within the root zone does not have a negative impact on their viability. To ensure the viability of new trees planted in line with the two existing trees, consideration should be given to limiting the footprint of the three B1s and B2 units to the west, fronting on the LA. This is a recommendation from the heritage planner. He's looking at the Grand LA the correct way. Those buildings should be set back. Next slide, please. Within that same report, his conclusions reduce the ground floor footprint of units B1 and B2 fronting onto the LA. Next slide, please. So this is the best depiction I can find in all of the documents that are online. This is a construction management plan, but it does show the existing buildings on the left on the LA. It shows the trees, mature trees along the LA about every 10 meters. And then it shows the proposed townhouses and how far they project past the line of the existing Milu building and the Valentine building. And on the right side, well, there are no buildings there. It's just all grass. But who would expect that the forecourt towns be set back as far as these? What John has suggested, with the old Ottawa East Community Association has suggested, well, at least move it back 2 meters to give the 6 new trees a chance to mature and be canopy trees.
Paul, you're out of time. I'll give you one more sentence.
I'm sure, looking at that slide, we've suggested that the right-hand side be turned counterclockwise and the left-hand side turned clockwise, just reducing the parking, the asphalt a little bit. When you look at it, if you look at this diagram again,
Paul,
this illustration, you can see there's more parking than
all
building.
committee members have the, I think they've gotten that point. But I don't know if anyone has any questions for Mr. Goodkey. No. Okay, Paul, thank you very much for your presentation today. Which will bring us to the applicant team. Have we got this right? Evan Garfinkel at Regional Group and Greg Winters at Novatech. Oh, great, thanks. Yes. Welcome, gentlemen. Whenever you're ready, you'll have 7 minutes to address the committee.
There we go. Thank you very much for having us today. We're here to discuss the forecourt towns at Greystone Village. Next slide, please. On the screen, you can see the 2015 concept plan. Again, the emphasis on the word concept plan. This was a rendering that was done over a decade ago. To date, we've probably built about 90% of what we should have, or what we had originally envisioned. The 2 blocks in question are shown here in pink. Yes. Got to check my color blindness. We had initially envisioned 2 back-to-back blocks, but over the last 6 years at Regional, we've gone through over 20 renditions. And we have had, we've had some troubles making this block work due to the curvilinear nature, trying to respect the heritage trees, the heritage building. Next slide, please. So we've landed to a similar plan in 2025. You can see the forecourt towns are rounded out here. Next slide. This is our site plan here. As you can see, it's a mix of townhomes and semi-detached towns, 30 in total across 2 blocks separated by the LA. The carcourt, which is essentially a shared driveway. The intention of the shared driveway is for vehicular use to the units, also for snow clearing and also for waste removal. Waste trucks need proper clearance to get in and out of that site. This block has frontage on all park sides and the Des Châtelet side. It is a gentle density as opposed to what we were proposing originally. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, the community has 3 concerns. One of them has already been resolved. The first was that trees could not be sufficiently planted. And the second was the viewpoints to the heritage building and the assumption that we would be disturbing the heritage building. Next slide, please. Just quickly on the tree planting. This is an image of the inventory of existing trees at the Grand LA. As you'll see here, the red maple is the predominant tree within the Grand LA. I'm going to read an email from the city forester very quickly. I'd recommend planting a red maple over a sugar maple, which is much more difficult to establish and keep healthy. Maturity size isn't everything, and if the probability of survival to maturity is higher with red, I will support the species selection because it is the interest of the urban forest and the taxpayers. So we can accommodate trees. We can accommodate trees that are already within Greystone. Next slide, please.
So I'll speak to the matters of zoning here. So starting with the current site plan that you see in front of it that's been marked up for setbacks, the proposed zoning is consistent with the established zoning that was adopted by council in 2015. The original zoning shifted the boundaries of the existing zones to match the legal plan for the development and introduced the R3Q exception that's currently on the site. Community consultation, as noted in 2015 report, spanned 3 years, and the 2015 zoning amended the zoning to reflect the subdivision plan and the heritage report for the site. The block limits established in that earlier process have not changed throughout this proposal, and the heritage limits remain the same. I was wondering if we could just change to the next slide, please. So this is a copy of the heritage plan, and I don't know if you can zoom in, but as you can see the Grand Allée as it leaves from Main Street and goes down towards Des Châtelet, which is the curved street in the middle, and then goes actually into the forecourt park. The heritage limits already narrow at that point in time. So as they went through the process, they defined it legally on a plan to show that the limits narrowed as you entered into the Grand Allée. The zoning amendment that before you today is primarily triggered by a technical interpretation of the zoning. Because block 29, which is the northern block, fronts onto 2 streets, it ends up with an interpretation that there's a rear yard next to the Grand Allée, which was never the intent. The proposed development conforms to the official plan and is exemplified in our supporting planning rationale in the city staff report before you today. The heritage plan block limits cannot be changed. The legal limits cannot be changed. Doing so would undermine the zoning established in 2015 that was reflective of the heritage plan. If you could turn to page, I believe, 9. Yes, thank you very much. This is an example of where Novatech, our transportation engineers, have done the turning movements. And we tried desperately to try to find movements that would work, and we narrowed it as much as possible. The problem is not with the 2-car garages, it's the single-car garages. As you back up, you just don't make the turn coming out, and the cars would actually hit the sides of the buildings. So we spent considerable amount of time on this. We minimized the garages and the driveways going into them as much as possible. Pushing the units closer together or shifting them would make the situation unworkable for parking templates and restrict the view to the heritage building. Thank you.
Okay, this is talking a little bit about the architecture. This is the, excuse me, the townhouse block basically backs onto to the Grand Allée. What we have here is 3 floor plates, the ground, second, third floor plate. At the request of the councillor, we were asked to actually take a look at the actual unit and see what the impact was if we take 2 meters off of the building. So on the ground floor, essentially you lose all the livable space and you're left with a garage. Second floor is a tight little floor plate to begin with. You lose about 110 square feet per unit across the 3 units, which makes the living, dining, and kitchen areas extremely challenging. On the 3rd floor, you essentially lose a bedroom. At the end of the day, all 3 of those units would be 1-bedroom units with no livable space on the ground floor. That connection to the park, to the community, everything. Next slide, please. These are just a couple photographs showing the liveliness of the Grand LA and that connection. Basically, your eye is just drawn towards the Grand LA, that major focal point of the Châtelet building. We've seen these images already. Next slide, please. Again, this is just trying to reorganize and put yourself directly down the center. Again, the trees are what's important here. Your view is naturally aligned with the trees on either side of the alley towards the hierarchical central focal point of the Châtelet facade, which is the most important piece of this heritage corridor. It emphasizes the grand entrance, which stands out through scale, central placement, and alignment with the pedestrian walkway. Next slide, please. Again, another view very close to the Châtelet Avenue. We can just jump to the next slide. We've seen all these. This is an important one. You're standing basically on the Châtelet Avenue with the development.
You are out of time now if you want to take 1 or 2 sentences to wrap up.
The development is essentially on either side of the trees. This is the view, the focal point of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on, Councilor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. And as I said at the top, I wish we weren't at this point and that we could have come to an elegant solution, because it doesn't seem like much. I think there's a lot of zoning bylaw amendments that are in here, which I support, and community supports them too. It's just this one piece. I did want to ask about the housing units. Why did we move from, I guess, a higher amount of units to a lower amount? Why can't we have more housing units in this area?
Through you, Chair, it was a combination of development, original development concepts not working from a design scale, also from a financial scale. We felt that the back-to-backs were a little bit of an overbuild. The last image up on the screen, you can actually see what we had done with Hoban architecture was a little bit of a less aggressive form of density that opened up 6 new viewpoints into the heritage building. The original block was a block that stretched the whole parcel. This now has these shared courts, have 6 viewpoints that go straight through the focal point. So it was a design decision, it was a financial decision, and it was a planning decision.
Okay, that's helpful. The driving in and out, like there's a lot of people in, well, I think all of our wards, but in my ward, I think of several streets where you drive into your parking space and then you back out onto the road. Most people, that's how they're not like doing a 3-point turn in their driveway, for example, right? So in this case, why can't we have it so that somebody's driving into their parking space and then backing out the exact way they drove in without doing a 3-point turn within that kind of strange radius area?
So through the chair, we considered this when we were looking at the initial design, some of the very early concepts and how we could do it. One of the ideas was to avoid having individual driveways for every single unit backing out onto the street. When we got into the discussion around having multiple driveways and tucking the driveways in and the garages away from the public entrances of the street to kind of hide them from that into the interior driveway space, you end up with multiple driveways coming out. So you could run into conflicts with cars trying to back out. Not to mention the city transportation engineers identified an issue with the street that's right next door to it, name just slip smeared at the moment. But where Deschâtelet turns the corner, it runs into another intersection, and you could end up with a conflict with the person turning left onto the site with cars then backing out into that space. And it is a bus route along there. So it was deemed to be inappropriate to have that number of cars backing out.
Okay, I mean, I guess it is feasible, it is possible, and it exists on many streets that have transit now. I think of Sunnyside, like that's how people get in and out. They drive in, then they back out of their driveway onto a bus street, much more busy street, I'd argue, and then get on their way. And I guess for the sake of that 2 meters and moving things slightly without losing housing units, to me, it's something that, again, we shouldn't be here. We should have worked this out with our staff and community. Chair, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to be clear. You are planning to plant 4 trees, 2 on each side adjacent to the new units being built.
We don't. We've been instructed by the Parks Department not to put any assets into their park. But we have done our due diligence to ensure that the adequate soil volume and setbacks is met for when the city does their park design.
Okay, so you're not planning to plant, but the city would be planting
Correct.
trees. And the issue is whether they're red maples or sugar maples. But I just want to make sure I understand. Red maples are smaller than sugar maples. Red maples have a smaller root ball than sugar maples, and that's why the red maples are being recommended.
Through you, Chair. Yes, that's correct.
And there are red maples and sugar maples currently along the rest of the Grand Allée.
Through you, Chair. Yes, that is correct. The red maple is the predominant tree, and I just want to refer again to an email from Mark Richardson, the city forester, where he actually prefers the red maple. He would recommend it as the city forester, as it's in the best interest of the urban forester and the taxpayer.
Okay, so we're arguing over whether we're planting a really big maple or a big maple, I guess.
And again, if you were to look at the actual images, like the actual images down the Grand Allée, the red maple is a large maple. It is just for some reason classified as a medium, but it can rise to the heights that are seen within the Grand Allée currently. So the red maples that you are looking at, when you look at those pictures that are on our slide deck, they can rise to that height. They are a substantial height.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Kitts.
Thanks, Chair. I was also going to ask about trees, but I think Councillor Gower has sufficiently covered that. Some of the delegates referenced the heritage report and the impact of the Grand Allée, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on that.
Through your Chair. Yeah, I believe that those are sections that were commented on, but they are very select sections that have been picked. The sections that are referenced are alternatives. That's where it mentions the reduction to the ground floor. If you look throughout the report on a number of different pages, you know, there's comments like the limits of the Grand Allée as defined in the designation bylaw are respected. There are no adverse impacts. On this slide here, the cultural heritage values and character defining features associated with the designated Chatelet building and designated landscape forecourt and alley are respected, and there are no impacts from the proposed development on blocks 28 and 29.
Okay, thank you for that. Respectfully, I'm surprised delegated authority was pulled on this, to be honest. And in my experience working with regional, you are one of the more community-minded developers, to your credit. So I'm sure that you know, these community concerns were considered and tried to be handled to the best of your ability, in my view. So thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Chair. A couple of quick questions, and I've been around here a little while. A few of us have. When did this project start? Was this under a former councillor?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
When did this project start?
So the application was deemed complete. I'm going to look at my staff here in December, early January, but we had started the 3-tier pre-consultation process in May of that year, if I'm not mistaken, May 2024.
I feel this has been going on for a long time, right? This is that parcel of land. Yeah, and when it comes to, like, I think David Chernyshenko was the councillor at the time. This is a very long process. Was there no way to resolve it? Like, I don't want to fight about spruces and maple trees. I find this very odd. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, for crying out loud. So, you know, if we were to go ahead and say, we're going ahead here, you'll still continue to work with the community, I assume?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have throughout the entirety of the project. You know, my predecessors, David and Josh Cardiff, have welcomed the Old Ottawa East Community Association from the outset. And, you know, we always want to keep that relationship active and fruitful.
Yeah. And you know, the councillor for the area obviously has to respect the people that he's hearing from too. But I think we all agree this is a little long in the tooth for me. You know, I've seen a couple of councils go through there. It's we have a housing crisis, and we're always criticized by the provincial governments for delaying things. This would probably be on that list. So thank you for coming out and answering the questions today. I'll have some questions for staff.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. And I don't see any further questions for the applicant team. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentation today, which will bring us to questions of staff. Vice Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the applicant said staff told them not to plant trees, and then the applicant gave some indication that trees would be planted in the park. Can staff just comment or clarify that piece?
Yes, thank you for your question through you, Chair. Through the pre-consultation process, our park staff did want to limit the amount of assets being planted within the future forecourt park, given that the designs haven't been finalized. Through recent discussions as part of the ongoing zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control application process, park staff have indicated that they are supportive of additional tree plantings within the alley in line with the existing trees.
Okay, and if they're supportive, can staff just confirm that there would be adequate space for the roots of the trees that staff intend to plant?
Yes, so our forestry staff have been in review of some proposed tree plantings. We will continue the technical review of the tree plantings through the site plan control application, but they have indicated an adequate level of soil and that the trees can reach maturity. With respect to the site plan application, the tree plantings will be reflected within the approval.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Councillor Tierney. Councillor Menard.
I can only wish. Thanks, Chair. I appreciate that. And I think on the tree issue, to Councillor Gower, I agree. I think a lot has been solved. There's even a tree there that existing now that staff have said we're going to retain that. We don't know how much life it has left. It could have 10 years, could have more or less, but they're going to retain that through this process. The tree issue to me isn't as large as the viewpoints, where the thousands of people that'll come here to view that heritage building that's been there for over 100 years and will be there for ostensibly another 100 years. We'll host a school, community center, affordable housing for seniors, and a new community center gym. So there's a lot going on in this area. To me, it's the thousands of viewpoints of that building versus the 6 parking spots. That's kind of where we're at. I agree about the trees. I think those can be planted. So just to staff, how many units are being proposed here?
30.
And previously there was more units proposed, but they've reduced those. How many parking spaces for the 30 units are being proposed?
I believe there'd be 1 per unit.
I'm sorry, say it again?
There would be 1 per unit.
1 per unit. So there's 30 parking spaces, 30 units. If there was less parking here, let's say 3 or 4 less spots, or the parking was designed in the way that you drive into your parking spot and then drive out like most people do onto the street, could that be accommodated to still get those 30 units in there?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last portion?
Just the argument is around those 6 parking spaces and the radius for a turn. If there was, say, a change in the method of parking or the number of parking spaces, say 24 instead of 30, or 26 instead of 30, is there not a way that we could fit those units in there and have that little bit of extra space that the community is asking for?
With respect to the proposal that's before us, they are proposing a zoning compliant level of parking spaces. When looking at the Greystone Village at large, a variety of build form typology exists within the neighborhood. And while multi-tenant buildings generally have reduced parking rates, ground-oriented dwelling units do generally provide for vehicular parking spaces given that type and nature of building typology. And as noted, the proposed parking is permitted by the zoning, and there is no relief sought for the zoning.
No, I agree. Yeah, I know it's permitted. I mean, we have probably a little bit outdated parking rules that we're probably updating as part of the new zoning bylaw. I understand it's permitted. I guess it's the design that's an issue. I don't know how many of you drive into your driveway and then back out onto a street, but like most residents in my area do. A simple change like that could allow for this view plane that is going to be enjoyed by thousands versus 6 parking spots that we can't accommodate. So I would just say, look at these folks have been good partners. We've worked together. This is not the only development in the area. Like there's been hundreds and hundreds of units developed here over, gosh, a decade, and we've all done well to get those in there to build them. This is a beautiful area. I think sending this one back and saying, hey, do a little bit more work, come back in a month, come back in 2 months, because it's not going to take much to change it. That would make sense to me to say, look, for the sake of 6 parking spots versus the thousands of people that enjoy that viewpoint with those trees and the historic J Chalet building, to me, that's not a stretch to say, look, come back, talk to us, work with the community, and come back with something that's going to work for everyone with the same or more housing units, ideally. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Menard. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you. Again, I think it's already been articulated. This is well over a decade, this parcel of land, and I've seen developments go up in years with thousands of units. Lots has changed since back when this first all started. I think we all identify that we have a housing issue, and sending this back will, in my mind, delay things probably a good period of time, would it not?
Thank you for your question, through your chair. With respect to the Greystone Village plan of subdivision, these are essentially the final 2 parcels that need to be developed. And with respect to the proposed density and on the topic of housing, they are exceeding our density targets within the official plan.
Okay, and I'm trying to think. Applications with Greystone have, like, pulling delegated authority is kind of like the nuclear button, right? So has this happened before with Greystone? Are they a bad organization? I'm trying to understand why we're at this point over a decade later.
So with respect to pulling delegated authority, it is a fairly new process. In January 1st of this year, new processes have essentially outlined that minor zoning bylaw amendments have been delegated to staff. And through the process, when staff are ready to propose a recommendation forward through their delegated authority report, we do provide the DAR, or at least our recommendation, to the ward councillor. And at that point, it's at their discretion that they can lift delegated authority and bring it to the Planning and Housing Committee. And as noted earlier in today's meeting, I believe Councillor Menard just wanted to have the opportunity to speak to the community concerns at large with respect to the heritage views, car courts, and tree plantings.
Certainly, as a good councillor, you have to do that. You have to bring those concerns and make them public. I think he's done a terrific job on that. But I also do recognize, if this is the first litmus test that we're going to start using this, I would prefer to use the nuclear button on something that is of real concern, not trees and parking. We need housing. For that reason, I'm hoping my colleagues support plowing ahead with this project, get it complete, because we're going to have many more applications that will be far more contentious than a tree or some parking. And I think that's where our efforts are best served. But I do appreciate the councillor bringing it forward. He does have a concern. He's representing his community, but I will not be supporting any kind of delay on this, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Menard, did you have any final comments?
No, thanks very much for the time, Chair.
Okay. There are no further comment or questions of staff. Is this item carried? Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. From the Office of City Clerk, there is a report, the status update on the Planning and Housing Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending May 9th. Is that item received? Okay, I'm going to temporarily yield the chair to Vice Chair Gower as we move into my report, Student Housing Caucus. You want? Yeah, might as well. It's fun. It's fun.
Okay, so this is item 6.1 on the agenda. This is a councillor's report from Councillor/Chair Leeper, and I'll let Jeff introduce it.
Thank you very much, Chair. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to hear from the University of Ottawa's Student Union's Housing Caucus, who had undertaken a sophisticated and comprehensive and large study of the student population and some of the challenges that University of Ottawa students are facing with respect to finding housing. Many of their data points were extremely compelling, and I thought it would be useful to bring this as a report to to this committee. And I really don't have much to add. I think the students will do a fantastic job speaking for themselves. So, Chair, thank you very much for that opportunity.
Okay, well, we'll invite the students up to make the presentation. Welcome.
No.
Good morning. I'll let each of you introduce yourselves as you speak, I guess. And just when you're ready to go, make sure you press the button and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you all having us here today. Thank you, Chair/Counselor Jeff Lee for giving us this time. We're very excited to present. So the Student Exploratory Housing Caucus, if you don't mind going to the next slide. My name is Alex Stratus. I'm the Advocacy Commissioner for the University of Ottawa Students' Union. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we're here today to, first of all, present the Housing Caucus report. And before we start, I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. We are on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and while we conducted this report and did our findings, we always consider that 2.6% of the population is Indigenous in Ottawa, and 19% of them are houseless. That's 1 in 5. And a lot of our students are Indigenous at U Ottawa. So while we did these recommendations and we had our solutions, we made sure to consider them in our findings. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So I would like to start off the Student Housing Caucus. Over here, we have James Adair. He was the chair of the caucus. It was his idea to start this off. And the point is to add a visualization and data to student struggle at the University of Ottawa, because we know we're struggling. We can feel it. Our parents keep telling us we're never going to own. Renting's going to be a nightmare. And it's going to be a very hard struggle, but it's always hidden behind this culture that students should be eating ramen all the time and skipping meals and going through that struggle when they go through school, and then they graduate and then they get everything. But we're noticing through time that things are getting a lot harder. The student experience is no longer, you have a part-time job, you have a full-time course load, and you have a social life. It's now you're dealing with 2-3 part-time jobs. You have a full course load and you're failing some. You're skipping a lot of meals. It's becoming worse, and there's no data to really put that there. So in our report, 91% of students said rent negatively affects their mental health. 53% said it impacts their schooling. So we don't want this to be normalized. In the methodologies of our report, we used quantitative and qualitative to make sure we had both hard data to share to you, the University of Ottawa, and we had stories so that student stories can shine through and you could really feel it in this report.
Part of what we looked at was how difficult it is to find housing as a student, and 52%, so the majority of students said that it was either somewhat difficult or very difficult to secure accommodations in Ottawa, which I don't think comes as a surprise to anyone. And the majority of students are finding their apartments through tools like Kijiji, rent.ca, etc., or Facebook. Interestingly, what we found was the university has a housing board. That's something that when we were talking with a lot of alumni, they're like, oh, do people use the housing board? And only 2% of students use the university housing board. So the majority of students are finding housing through other like kind of third-party applications. Next slide. One student, and this was a pretty common story, said that places go so fast that there were times that they scheduled to see the place, and with a few hours, the tour was canceled because someone else secured it, or that there was also a lot of extra BS charges or fees, either application fees or deposits. And I think this reflects kind of the crisis that we're facing, that housing is, people are booking tours for like the same day, and by the time that it's their time to go tour the apartment's already off the market, which leads to an immense amount of competition. Next slide. We had students from a variety of neighborhoods in Ottawa, but the most expensive were Sandy Hill, Centertown, and Vanier, or that's where the most students lived, I mean. But on average, students are paying over $900 a month in rent, and about a quarter of students rely solely on working to pay their rent. So if you're working a minimum wage job in Ottawa, which many students are, either like, working service or anything, you're working 54 hours a month just to pay your rent. That doesn't include tuition. That doesn't include the cost of food. That doesn't include, wanting to go out every once in a while with your friends. That's 54 hours a month just to pay rent, which is a lot. We also found that students who were renting with a corporate landlord, like Smart Living or an REIT, were paying over $100 more than the average. They're paying around $1,000 a month in rent, which is especially concerning in areas like Sandy Hill, where the housing market, especially around the university, has become increasingly financialized and is increasingly dominated by these large corporations. Next slide, please. One student, and this speaks to what Alex talked about earlier, said that their grades have plummeted since they've had to work 2 jobs in addition to the 5 courses in order to feed and house themselves. And the responsibility of housing costs is a very big mental burden. Another student said, since I have no financial support and almost no loans or grants, I'm forced to work 2 jobs to support myself. This affects my school results. That was a pretty common story we heard, and it's especially worse among international students who have limited hours they can work off campus and who are often paying exponentially higher tuition. And so students are working more hours, paying higher rent, and are receiving worse accommodations. Next slide.
Finding a place to live is only half the problem. The houses that students find are often in abhorrent states, facing a plethora of issues like pests, lack of air quality, no air conditioning, crumbling infrastructure, heating issues, non-functional appliances, and more. Students reported issues with breathing due to the mold in their homes, mentioned long arguments with landlords over pests and fixing appliances, and having to relocate and go through the entire process again due to bed bugs, floods, and even fires in the case of 2 students whose houses burned down, leaving them homeless and uninsured. And as we head into another summer that will almost certainly hit 30 degrees and more, 54% of students will be left without air conditioning, contrary to the City of Ottawa bylaw that sets a standard of 20 degrees maximum in the daytime. We're aware this is seen as a rite of passage for students, that living in these conditions is told to us to be the nature of being a poor student. But this housing crisis is unprecedented. With the lack of newly built housing in student communities, you either have to pay a hefty price or deal with unsafe, unsanitary, and dangerous conditions.
The familiarity that students had with their rights as tenants was brought into question in this report, and a majority of students expressed moderate familiarity with their rights. However, despite this, landlords and/or corporate agencies continuously violate the rights of tenants as stated in the Tenants' Rights Acts and make no effort in maintaining or adhering to Ontario laws. Violations of these Tenant Rights Acts include illegally entering a unit without 24 hours notice, which was a really common comment that students made, withholding vital services necessary for the residents to be habitable without notice, and requiring unnecessary and unreasonable fees and rent payments, and unfortunately, many more. With these violations, residence becomes near inhabitable for students. A primary example of tenant right violations, as expressed by students, as mentioned above, were landlords and corporate managers entering their apartments with 0 notice. A quote that a student stated, "We had people who were coming in unannounced to work on things which I was very fed up with." And just imagine having this happen day on and day on when you're just trying to live your life in your own home. This unfortunately falls into the consistent pattern of exploitation of students in this housing crisis, where they are left uninformed and are forced to sacrifice their rights to live in some sort of space. In addition, students are offered almost no support when tackling repercussions on landlords and corporate agencies who violate their rights in return. Currently, the Landlord and Tenant Board require a $45 fee upon completing an application to report landlords and their violations. But it doesn't exactly just stop there. Court orders and hearings, as may be required when reporting a landlord, is a long task that only takes up students' time and energy. For students to commit to such a process, they must miss class, work, or other responsibilities to advocate for rights that should already be non-negotiable to begin with. Next slide.
Okay, so actually, could I get the next slide presented first and then go back to this one after, if that's all right? Thank you so much. So generally, students feel safe in their communities and in their homes. When we adjusted for race and gender, very little difference was observed. But when we break it down by community or region, that's where we really get the insights. So according to students, the safest communities were Nepean, Old Ottawa East, and Gloucester, with the unsafest being Vanier, Lower Town, and Byward Market. In these areas closest to downtown, a variety of people like students, workers, families, and unhoused people live together and share a space. But when we leave the homelessness crisis unaddressed, it's causing disputes, feelings of unsafety, and mistrust between community members, and something that's going to be more and more difficult to tackle later on. And this is something that was clear within our findings. If we could go back to the previous slide. So we asked what students felt that made them feel unsafe. 30% mentioned homeless people in one way or another, either referencing an actual instance of harassment or crime or just uncomfort and feelings of insecurity. Next on that list was proximity to a homeless shelter, public substance use, and crime. Interestingly, many students simply wrote down Rideau or Byward, as if this massive public health and housing crisis is an inherent trait of our community, which it is not. When asked what would make students feel safer, some certainly said more police and more patrolling, but I know I don't have to tell this city council that police are already spending a lot of their time in that downtown area. Students are also aware that this crisis is bigger than just a single arrest or a phone call to the police. Students mentioned that they wanted to see more services for vulnerable neighbors and commitment to resolving the deeply systemic issue of unaffordable housing in the city. And this section is really where we saw the intersection between the homelessness crisis in Ottawa and the student housing crisis. Next slide, please.
There's a significant link between poor housing and poor health outcomes, and this has been a fact that has been known by researchers in public health for years. Yet it still remains the reality for many students, and it has not changed. 62% of students reported their housing situation has negatively impacted their mental health. One student quoted that it is difficult to not think about the money. That money being money to afford food, basic living necessities, and an energy they need to complete an education that they cannot even focus on, an education that they have to forget so they can live with basic necessities that everyone should have. You can go to the next slide. Quote, "It is hard on mental health when rent anywhere is expenses for a whole or apartment, and you're essentially living paycheck to paycheck. The fact that there's no way to get a decent apartment means you're stuck in a horrible one, and a poor environment degrades mental health." End quote. These quotations are a reflection of the dissolving student identity. Students are forced to forgo their role as a student so they can afford basic necessities and living. Students have to miss classes, assignments, and time spent forwarding education to make enough money to even have a roof over their head. Students are experiencing declining grades, mental and physical health as a result of this housing crisis. They are no longer to be able to develop themselves as a future generation of the city because this city has yet to fully recognize the struggles that they face. Next slide.
We have a variety of recommendations in our report, which you can find on the Student Union website. And we understand that the housing crisis and the student housing crisis are multilateral issues. So there's recommendations for the province, the federal government, as well as the University of Ottawa and the City of Ottawa. Because there needs to be a lot more collaboration than there currently is happening, which is why our first recommendation that we would like to see the city and the University of Ottawa work on is developing a long-term student housing strategy. Something that we kept hearing when we were talking with experts was that enrollment figures aren't shared with the City of Ottawa. So the City of Ottawa doesn't know how many new students may be coming in. And those figures aren't shared with community members. So what we are recommending is that the City of Ottawa, the University of Ottawa, Carleton, and the other major players collaborate on developing a long-term student housing strategy. Our second recommendation is that the City of Ottawa provides financial and zoning incentives for nonprofit and housing cooperatives to create affordable, sustainable, and community-driven student housing projects. This is something that's been done in Waterloo to great success. Waterloo has some of the highest rates of nonprofit student housing and some of the lowest student rental prices. We're also encouraging the City of Ottawa to establish, student housing affordability zones within a 5-kilometer radius around post-secondary institutions to encourage the development of purpose-built student accommodations. Canada has some of the lowest bed-to-student ratios for purpose-built student accommodations in the G7, and it's part of the reason why the housing crisis has exploded among students, which obviously has trickle-down effects for communities across Ottawa. And then our final recommendation is that the City of Ottawa allocates municipal funds to support community land trusts, which can provide the necessary capital for acquiring land and properties and enabling development and preservation of affordable housing units. In areas like Sandy Hill, which is obviously where many of our students are, what we saw was that affordable housing and high quality housing was often bought by a corporate landlord and then divided into like 8 units where there was like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 people living in one half of a house. And while obviously we need a lot more density, a lot more units, there should be space for nonprofit and affordable housing units that are maintained in the market.
And that concludes our presentation. Thank you all for listening. I also forgot to thank the committee coordinator, Ms. Kelly Crozier, and of course, the city councilor's assistant, who is incredible in helping us do this background work. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation. I think you're going to have a few questions. Councillor Johnson is up first.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And I was actually going to ask if you had done any looking into acquisition. And of course, on the final slide you have. So you may or may not know that I moved a motion that failed last year to ask the city to put some money aside for acquisition. Can you help us to understand from your perspective why the idea of acquisition is such an important part of preserving affordable housing? Thank you.
When we were doing our research, we actually saw your motion, and I think we can all say that we think it's unfortunate that it failed, especially considering that we're heading into tariffs where construction in general is going to be much more expensive and maintaining affordable housing units is going to be incredibly valuable. But from our side of things as students, I think the reason that acquisition and maintaining affordable housing units is important is because what we were finding is that the new construction that was being built was wildly out of reach for a lot of students, except for the the most financially stable, and it also helps with community cohesion in a lot of ways. We have a literature review in here, and it was something that also came up when we were doing interviews and qualitative analysis, but there's a lot of tension in Sandy Hill, and I think that's a trait of a lot of student communities because longtime residents often feel like their community is going to end up being purchased by some faceless company, and all their family homes are going to be bought up and divided. And then older apartments and brownstones are also bought up and then often torn down and turned into like very expensive out of reach housing, whereas acquisition can come in and maintain that those, brownstones that already exist that provide it and housing for a lot of people can maintain the character of the community, help with some of that intra-community conflict, but also maintain affordable housing where it's at. And I'm sure my colleague Elnaz also has some thoughts to add.
Thanks. Just one more follow-up because Nepean was mentioned. So Nepean, you saw, was one of the safer places for students to live, but I wonder, similar or different, the purpose-built rental housing out in Nepean can be pretty few and far between. Have you had any reports from your research of students living in homes that they don't believe actually meet code or have been chopped up in certain ways in Nepean to accommodate more students than they should be able to handle?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Honestly, I was surprised that we had students from Nepean. I think it was at least 5 or 6 because the survey targeted renters only. And I would have previously thought that the students living in Nepean were living with family members or were living with, so that's not something that we had too much data on. up to code. I mean, no, not too much data on Nepean there, but just in general though, you'll meet lots of students who live in housing where you really question, like, is that really legal? And there's actually some really expensive buildings, some really expensive like student housing companies that have like, you go in and it's not supposed to be a 2-bedroom, but they've put up a wall, but there's like a space in between, like there's an empty space between the roof. So there's no like window in this bedroom. They've just made up a bedroom and they're charging students the price of a 2-bedroom or even the price of a 3-bedroom for what is legally a 1-bedroom. And they're just getting away, and they're like getting away with this, even though there's no window and even though it's not even a real wall. And like, you just have to question how they're getting away with this and how this is the solution. So I wish I had more data on Nepean, but the shady buildings, oh yeah, for sure.
Thank you. I know that I work with Algonquin College to make sure that they're looking at the landlord list that is on our website, as well as having them sort of have a conversation about if it's too good to be true, it may be. But I'll get off. I see you have lots of questions. Thank you.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. I feel like this is a snapshot of what's going on right now. And I don't know if, only anecdotally, whether it's worse or, the same, because it always feels like it's always been bad for students to find accommodation, and it's always been expensive. But now with the housing crisis, it's even more so. So it would be good to know comparison of years gone by. I think anybody who's gone to universities had stories about weird places they've lived. So, but one thing I was looking up, there's only 4,100 units of student housing on campus. And there's a population of 44,000. I'm just talking about University of Ottawa alone. So that's not even 10%. It just strikes me that that should be the first place to be, is universities, frankly, could make a lot of money off students because landlords are. But that would be something that they should be looking into in the future. But to have more nonprofit, affordable and safe residents in the future. It's something I've never experienced because I couldn't possibly get into a residence. So I appreciate that. So I just, but I have a question for you in terms of the UPass. The UPass was created to make it so that people could live just about anywhere and get to university, so that it's always fantastic to live in walking distance, but not always possible. And I just wanted to know if that makes a difference.
Yeah, so public transportation is essential for student life and student culture, especially as you mentioned, it can be hard to walk around. So there was also, sorry, just give me 30. Yeah. So the thing with public transit is it's essential for student life, and without that source of reliability, students are forced to Uber or forced to spend a lot of extra money on these supportive other means. And students often don't have cars. I don't know many who do, and when we do find a student with a car, everyone carpools with them. They go to Walmart, they find, a way to shop for groceries that isn't the Farm Boy Rito Center. But yeah. So we're currently in negotiation with the University of Ottawa, with UPass and OC Transpo, and a lot of people to renegotiate the UPass to make it more accessible, to stop that increase, to make the LRT, for example, they extended that wait time for students right before the first year of the first week of school, which was very chaotic. So public transit is essential for students to get around and get through those means. And as public transit is slowly becoming less and less reliable and less accessible, that means housing is becoming more essential because they want to find a place closer to campus, because they can't rely on the bus to actually come and show up, the 14, whatever it may be. So it really just adds to the student struggle. So.
Thank you. And definitely we need more nonprofit or non-market housing overall. I'm hoping to hear more about that from the promises of the federal government, and hoping the province kicks in as well. I'm chair of Ottawa Community Housing, so I'm always looking at nonprofit housing, but student housing is a category that's really important, and hopefully we'll see more being built. Thank you.
Councillor Trosser.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say this is one of the best reports we've seen at committee since I was elected. So excellent work. I think it's really important that you paint this picture because students are residents of the city too and deserve access to housing just like anyone else. So I represent Somerset Ward, which includes Centertown, and a phenomenon that we've been seeing is rooming houses that used to cater to folks who are sort of on the verge of homelessness. You know, people might pay $500 or $600 a room. We're seeing renovictions happening in those rooming houses. There's one just on Cartier Street down the street where the landlord essentially evicted everyone, threw up a flat screen TV on the wall, and is now charging $1,500 a room and basically targeting students. I'm just wondering if you heard in your survey or in your conversations, people who are living in those kinds of accommodations and what that's been like for them.
Yeah, I will say one of the questions that we asked was about like roommates. How many people do you live with? How many bedrooms do you live in? And there was it was such a big thing that students like were having tough situations at home with their roommates. Like they don't know their roommates. They don't know who they are. They just rent out a room basically. Sometimes that's the most affordable thing. And especially I think it's prevalent within international students who will live in places where landlords are kind of like, will just kind of rent out to anyone, doesn't really matter what the quality is. And international students are so desperate for housing because they face so much discrimination from landlords who want to like background check them. So that was especially common with international students. But there were so many conflicts with roommates, so many disputes over like even the quality of housing, over cleanliness and that. And like, again, like we know that having issues with your roommates has always been a thing. But I really think it does point to the fact that more and more students are having to live in these massive houses with people that they do not know and haven't ever met, and they're just kind of being thrown into this, and then these disputes start. And so like it should never, like so many students living with 7 or 8 roommates. That's insane.
Yeah.
In a house that was only meant to accommodate 3 or 4 people at most. So for sure, like these houses being bought and chopped up and then given to whoever with no relationship being built, no community being built here, it's like definitely an added barrier.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I paid $375 a month 20 years ago when I went to university. But the thing is, you could say, oh, inflation, but it's not like student loans or the wages have increased to a degree. And now students are paying $1,000, $1,200, $1,500, which is what you would pay to rent an entire house with roommates that you knew. But I do think this phenomena of these buildings becoming rooming houses, expensive rooming houses, that's a very interesting point about an increasing conflict among folks living together. How could you expect to have any sort of social contract with your roommates if you don't get to choose who they are?
And something I actually wanted to add on to this, because this was mentioned in one of the interviews that we did. So sometimes when students are like first looking for a place to live in, if they're not able to come into Ottawa, let's say they're from Toronto or they're from Kingston or from somewhere else, they go with video tours. One of the discussions we've had is that this person, they got a video tour with one of the landlords, but the video tour, like it looked like they weren't showing them the entire unit, like they were showing them some parts and some other portions. And then when they actually came to the unit, it was completely trashed. There was more people that they expected. Some parts were broken, some parts were replaced. And then the landlord was like, oh, I'm adding in this fee because I fixed this. I'm adding this fee because I fixed that. But these are things that they're hiding in the video tours. And unfortunately, especially for students, and I can imagine international students, this is probably a really common occurrence for them because more often than not, they probably have to go with video tours because they're living outside of the country, or if they're living in a different town, those sorts of things. They're even just from the get-go, from even before they get into the unit, they're just met with things that they wouldn't expect, and unnecessary fees and things being chopped up, things being moved around, because unfortunately landlords have the opportunity to, and they're kind of just doing whatever they want and only really focusing on showing the parts that they actually want to show, just to kind of gauge the students into the housing. So this has been something that I've heard about in the interviews that we've done, and it's kind of been really unfortunate, unfortunately.
It's really eye-opening. Thanks for letting us know. Just one more question. So I had a developer approach me just last week. It's a company that's looking to do office to residential conversions, but kind of a soft conversion into more dormitory style living. sort of geared to students or to early, like very young professionals. So they are thinking of something where it's like a floor would have a handful of people working to living together, maybe 2 to 3 people sharing a bathroom, and then like a joint kitchen. So essentially like a university dorm, but for adults or for university students. And I asked them what the price point was, and they said sort of $1,200–$1,500. I'm just very curious to hear from you what you think about this proposal, because I thought, my goodness, you used to pay that to rent a whole house, right? And now it seems that it's like, we're innovating, but this model, you know, I mean, it certainly sounds like it will be profitable, but I'm just interested if you think that that would be part of the solution or not.
This is just like a symptom of the lack of supply. Like, this is what happens when we just don't have enough housing. This is like how landlords will try to make as much money as they can off of this crisis. Like, sure, let's build that, but let's build all of it. Let's keep building it, because the more supply there is, the less stingy landlords can be, and the more we have room to kind of leverage these demands and say, no, we want proper student housing. No student wants to live there. Like, that kind of housing is something universities should be building, but the university says they have no money, and I looked at that provincial budget and I almost believe them, right? Like, we have to, unfortunately, when we can't stand up, like, that's what happens when the private sector takes over.
Yeah, I was like, oh, you innovated. You reinvented rooming houses that are actually a thing. You reinvented a dormitory or a boarding house, which were a thing in the early 1900s. Anyway, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your perspective and all the research you did.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you. And I do have to leave like in 2 minutes. Just wanted to ask you about the third-party apps you were saying kids were using to find places. Which ones did you do research on?
We kind of just asked, like, are you using a third-party app? And then we listed some examples. It was like 43% of students were using like Kijiji or Zillow or PadMapper. And we had a couple students report that like they saw a unit or an apartment and that turned out to not actually exist. Like, it was just a fake thing. But we didn't get a lot of feedback on that. It was more just to figure out exactly where students were finding their housing.
Great. Well, thanks. I had a presentation from a student that was from Kitchener-Waterloo, I believe working with the University of Waterloo, that had created an app called nextroom.ca. And it was, their company was, and this was built by students, vetting landlords and matching up roommates. And it was a whole package in determining who had what furniture even to go in, and making sure roommates were matched with people that they actually liked or were in the same program, had the same study habits, similar to what universities do when you're trying to take a residence room. Anyway, he was trying to move into the Ottawa market, and in the tech park, we have Ottawa, Carleton University, Algonquin, and La Cité. So he was looking at that as a start, and I said he needed to connect with you guys. So I just was going to say, you might want to connect with this person, because it's a way of making sure that people get good units with people they like, and it's all a platform that, and if you go on right now, nextroom.ca, it lists Ottawa, Carleton, they've started in this area. So one component of it, I know that there's so many other issues, but they also, I believe, were trying to handle some of the problems ahead of time, so that they would make sure that units were great from the start, and no one would be allowed on that site, and they wouldn't promote anyone unless their units were of high quality. And you can't get onto the site unless you have a university email. So you have to be a university or college student. You have to have a, at the end, it's got to say CUNet or whatever. Anyway, just thought I'd share that with you, and but I'm sorry that I have to go, but thank you very much.
Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I simply just want to thank the panel this morning. I've had the pleasure to meet with some student leaders recently with Councillor Plante, who's the local councillor, to talk about a number of issues that are the responsibility of Ottawa bylaw to enforce. And I'm grateful for the advocacy that students have undertaken. I don't accept the fact that people say, well, I was a student and I struggled, and students just have to understand what it's like. There's some serious issues that are happening, and people are being taken advantage of, whether they're new to Canada or a born Canadian. Students are vulnerable away from home, and where deviations from the bylaw exist, that has to be upheld. So it takes papers like this to raise that awareness, to get media attention and to get our attention, the city's attention, as one of the 3 levels of government you've identified that needs to do better. So I wish we heard from you more on other matters. I know you've delegated on transit issues, but really I just want to say that this type of report is excellent. It really is. You've done really well. It's thorough. And what you've presented today for my colleagues is very much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Councillor Plant.
Yes, hi. Hi guys, good to see you at committee today. Oh, look at that. Hi. As a resident of Sandy Hill, I'm always so impressed with the students I run into. I get people who tell me all the time, oh my God, you live in like a student neighborhood. And I'm like, you wish you would. It's really awesome. The landlord thing aside, you guys give great energy. And as you've shown all my council colleagues today, you are no slouch when it comes to policy, research, and writing either. So I just had 2 follow-up questions for you. I missed the early beginning of your presentation, but did you guys talk to Carleton at all and the students at Carleton? And were there any similarities in those discussions?
No, so thank you, Councillor Plant. There was no discussion with Carleton when we were doing this. This was very much oriented towards Ottawa renters. But for some inspiration, I did take a look at some of the reports from Carleton, and I think they did a similar study with their students in like around 2016, 2017. Okay. And it was interesting. Their average rent, they had something around $500, $600, which I don't know if that's a 2016 phenomena or maybe just the location of Carleton. But that's definitely a conversation to have because that comparison, I mean, this is just the start, right? We're hoping to be able to do it in the future. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here, especially because Councillor Minot is here and say you guys are probably smarter than them. But, that's something we can talk about in a different setting. Because it's true. Okay, second question. Did you guys, and I'll sort of give you the floor here, but you did talk about a bit about la cohabitation, a bit of the what's happening with some, older homes are being torn down or they're being purchased, these older family homes, and then renovated to include all kinds of funky configurations to say there's 6 or 7 or 4 bedrooms when they originally were not. But I was wondering if you had an opportunity to talk about what's happening with the co-ops, both the Sandy Hill Co-op and the St. George's Co-ops on Henderson.
So while we were presenting, this is something we did mention, like I myself as the advocacy commissioner, when we have our meetings with the central administration, we get 45 minutes, we lay it all out on the table. Yeah. And this is like something we do bring up because they do have a campus master plan and a lot of it is mysterious. It's like this hidden plan. And we'd really like to know. They also plan on building a resident for students, and we are constantly asking them, like, will it be affordable? Will it be amenable for students if you're building this new residence? So when we do bring this up to them, they kind of shut us down and close us off. That is part of the advocacy work because we don't want to see residents of Sandy Hill, people who can't afford really to live anywhere else, to get kicked out so students can live in there. And the place that students live in there, like what's the likelihood that it'll be even affordable for them? So, it's always part of the conversation. That's part of the intersectionality proportion of our solutions in our report. And that's what I have to say. I think James is showing me something.
I'll also just mention in the report itself, we do talk about the co-op it's like the very last paragraph in the conclusion, and just about the history of displacement that students and universities have had, and how we think that's a history that can be corrected. So yes, it is something we did talk about.
Thank you. And I will, I had made a mental note to myself when we went to the launch, and thank you, Councillor Brockington, for coming to that, to put this in my newsletter, but I'm going to make a note to do it again and put it on my website. I do appreciate all the work and the advocacy you guys are doing. I think some people, they tend to have this view that students are just here for 4 years, so who cares about their living situation, who cares about the future of the community? But you guys have clearly demonstrated that you care, and it sounds hackneyed, but it matters. So merci beaucoup, on apprécie énormément tous les efforts que vous avez faits, et je vous passe la parole, Monsieur le Président. Thank you.
Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to Councillor Leeper for working with students in our city. And I think Councillor Plante might forget that I have 3 universities in the ward, including University of Ottawa. A portion of the University of Ottawa is in Capital Ward, in addition to Carleton and St. Paul University. And I really appreciate your work. We've worked together before. I recognize the faces and your names, and I want to say thank you. I'm going to bring up a very specific example of council taking some action on this issue that kind of goes under the radar, but I think it's the most impactful thing we've done for people that rent in over a decade. So council made a decision at the Finance and Corporate Services Committee to proactively reduce the ratio for multi-residential properties on the tax ratio from 1.4 to 1. It's an odd thing in that, you know, a lot of residential for, say, single units is 1, but for some reason, older apartments where many students rent, it was 1.4. So they were taxed at a higher rate. So we made this decision to lower that from 1.4 down to 1.0 to be equal with those single unit places and new multi-residential that's being built now. And the effect of it, the net effect that staff have calculated, is that there's a forced rent reduction of over that time from 1.4 to 1.0 of $94 monthly for tenants there. And so $1,128 per year. So a huge differential in terms of what city council can do to actually reduce rents directly for students and for other folks living in multi-residential. The big issue is making sure that that is passed along by those usually corporate landlords that own those buildings to tenants. So I guess my question to you is, can we work together to make sure that those things are passed along? I want to hear from tenants in those buildings that they're seeing those landlords pass along that reduction as a result of those tax decreases. If there's a tax decrease more than 2.5%, they must pass it along. And so letters are supposed to be sent out to each tenant and each landowner. And then that's supposed to be directly passed along, provided there's not a bunch of other cost increases. So I'm wondering, can we work together to see this through? Again, it kind of flew under the radar, but I think it's the most impactful thing City Council has done for tenants and for student renters, certainly this term of council. Are we able to work together on this to see if it's actually happening? Because I know staff are sending out letters soon on this, and I want to make sure you're receiving the letters and that we see that corresponding decrease occur.
We're really excited about the creation of a new tenants union in Sandy Hill, a group of neighbors working together precisely for these issues, noticing how much of Sandy Hill has been bought up and sold out in the past 5 years as a result of a variety of factors. But every single day, there's a new sign put up on a house, on an old crumbling house of Smartwell, Fahal & Co., whatever they are and however they're changing their names, that have bought up these properties. And the question is, like, who is this landlord? Is it a person? Is it a person that I can speak to? Is there someone who can come and fix my appliances when they're broken? The answer is usually no, it's a corporation. So I would certainly bring that up to the tenants union, and maybe there's some door knocking we can do there, some organizing we can do there to speak to those tenants, to ask them if that rent decrease has been passed on. Certainly that's something I would bring up to the union. And this is like a long-term fight we have now. It's so concerning how much of Sandy Hill has been bought up by corporations. And then as we spoke about, I mean, these heritage homes, these beautiful homes that families have been living in for decades, for centuries even, that are just being destroyed, I think, by super cheap, badly constructed, overly expensive corporate housing. And so that's something I'll bring up to the union for sure.
And something I wanted to add on to this as well is we're talking about like communication with larger corporate agencies, but coming from my own anecdote as someone that lived in a place with a private landlord, I think especially when if you go talk to the tenants union, it just kind of sort of put focus on private landlords or landlords that go kind of under the belt a little bit that might not work with corporate agencies. Because I can imagine those are probably harder to reach because most of the time, from my own experience and stories I've heard from other students who have to deal with random rent increases and those sorts of things, they come from private landlords just kind of doing their own thing. Like when I lived my own, I actually lived in Sandy Hill in an apartment, I randomly got a letter from the mail, printed out from the landlord saying that, oh, rent's increasing by like $25 next month. You have to pay this amount now. So I can imagine with larger corporate agencies, it might be easier to get into those communication channels, but private landlords, it might be a bit trickier because they definitely get under the carpet a little bit more. They don't really show up as often. They kind of, like my landlord literally disappeared for weeks and didn't respond to messages and those sorts of things. So I think it's definitely something to take into consideration when you're trying to approach this, because I think it sounds fantastic, but definitely trying to target those communication issues would be really great as well.
That's a really important point to make. And even just the coordination of staff sending those out to those tenants in those buildings, just to see, did you receive a letter? Right. And how are they making sure that all those multi-residential buildings, people are receiving that letter? So certainly, Chair, are staff here to answer questions on this, or is it not the time to do that to delegation? So maybe not. I just want to follow up on that one piece about those letters being mailed out and when that's happening. I'll do that over email though. Thank you. Thanks so much for your work. It's really appreciated.
Councillor Plant.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to monopolize all the time. I just had one last anecdote I wanted to share with the students, if you'll just permit me, Chair. So recently we went to see St. Paul's Eastern, which is on the corner of Daly and Cumberland, with a dance school because they're just looking to rent the basement. And the landlord who was showing us around is from Kingston, so it was like a bit of a trip for him to come in. And he was saying how he owns all these properties in Sandy Hill, sort of in response to their comments about the financialization of the area. And I said to him, I was like, oh, do you find that difficult to commute all the time and deal with your buildings? And by the way, this is nothing new. I hear all the time about landlords living in Moscow and India and elsewhere. And he said, I don't really care. There's students here. They don't care. And anyway, I just thought that comment was really interesting because he really didn't care. I asked him about his buildings. I asked him about the conditions of his buildings. And he knew kind of the numbers. Like I have a 3-bedroom, I have a this much, I have a 4-bedroom this much, but he couldn't tell me anything about the neighborhood. He couldn't tell me about any efforts to beautify the neighborhood, anything about the community association. So your concerns are real, and I sort of see them every single day. And it's kind of wild to me that people sort of just see dollar signs when they see the Sandy Hill area, and they see you guys as just a means to an end and not actual human beings that need, some landlord and tenant help like anybody else would. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Leeper, did you want to wrap up?
I mean, I can very briefly just say thank you very much for accepting my invitation to be here today. This has exceeded my expectations in terms of the attention that my colleagues have paid to what you're saying. I hope that your peers know that as they advocate through the student union and at the student unions at the various post-secondary institutions in Ottawa, that City Hall wants to hear that. Students are a critical part of this city. Personally, I believe that if we built the kind of city that you're asking us to build, it would be a much better city. So I want to hear and continue to hear those recommendations to us. Thank you so much for being here today, and colleagues, thanks for the attention that you've paid.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Appreciate it. And I'll turn the chair back over to Mayor Leeper.
Yeah, I'm glad that we had that very.
We need to receive that. We need to receive that report. Is that received?
Oh,
received. Now you can.
Yeah, now I can. We have adhered to the strict procedural requirements of City Council. Colleagues, we don't have any in-camera items today. You'll note the information previously distributed on cash in lieu of parkland. I believe Councillor Kitts has a notice of motion.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll read it in. Whereas Hard Rock Ottawa is currently undertaking a major redevelopment of the Rideau Carleton Raceway site to include a hotel, live entertainment venue, restaurants, and expanded casino facilities. And whereas as part of this redevelopment, the existing ground side sign located on Albion Road South is being replaced to improve visibility and modernize the site's branding. And whereas the existing sign was originally approved through a bylaw in the city of Gloucester and has been in place for more than 30 years, and whereas the proposed replacement sign will maintain the existing foundation, but will otherwise be completely rebuilt with updated materials and Hard Rock branding, and whereas the proposed sign represents a reduction in overall height by 7 feet, with a reduction in total signage area by approximately 15%, equating to a footprint decrease of over 500 square feet from the original design and over 200 square feet compared to the existing sign. And whereas the PWHL recently announced it will host its 2025 draft at Hard Rock Ottawa in late June, and timely completion of the signage is important for wayfinding and the site's overall presentation in advance of this high-profile event and Hard Rock's grand opening. And whereas the standard variance process includes legislative timelines and administrative tasks which could place the opening timeline and event readiness at risk, therefore be it resolved the council approve an exemption to section 122 of the permanent signs on private property bylaw with respect to sign height, sign face area, and message center area in order to permit the proposed replacement ground sign for Hard Rock Ottawa at the Rideau Carleton Raceway.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. We'll deal with that at our June 4th meeting. Are there any other notices of motion? I don't see any. Are there any inquiries? I don't see any. We have no other business. Just before we adjourn, colleagues, I just want to thank Vivi Chi has been serving as our acting GM of PDBS for many, many months, probably for far longer than you would have preferred. But thank you very much for that service. It has been a privilege to work with you in that capacity, and I know I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you as you continue to serve the city. So, Vivi, thank you. And colleagues, we're adjourned until June 4th. Thank you.